It is my pleasure to introduce our moderators for today's panel discussion, Growing Up with FTD, Young Caregivers on the FTD Journey. Since September 2024, Liz Matthews and Julia Mitchell have co-facilitated AFTD's National Support Group for young adult care partners ages 17 to 26. Together, they provide space for community, healing, and support for young people on the FTD journey. Their full bios can be found in the program, but I will give them time to introduce themselves before getting started today. Welcome, Julia and Liz. Please take it from here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Julia Mitchell, and alongside Liz, I co-facilitate the support group for young adult care partners. I'm currently a senior in college, and I'm going to get my master's in social work in the fall. And my connection to FTD, I lost my dad two and a half years ago at the age of 62, and he battled the disease for about 5 years. So I have a special connection with that, and I was about 16 or 17 when he got diagnosed and 20 when he passed away. So I wanted to, alongside Liz, create a space for youth to be able to identify and connect with other youth who are experiencing the same thing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Matthews. My connection to FTD is through my dad, who had the behavioral variant as well as ALS. I got involved with AFTD in 2020 with some fundraising, and since then, I've also been involved with government advocacy and other ways of raising awareness. And I currently run the National Young Adults Support Group with Julia Mitchell. We co-host it together. So from here on out, I'd like to introduce our panelists, Spencer Cline, Camille Dunn, and Tanisha Gupta.
Hi, my name's Spencer Cline. My connection with FTD is my dad had FTD. He passed away when I was 14 in 2012. He was impacted by the C9orf72 genetic mutation, and him and his three brothers all passed away from FTD or ALS. And currently I work in tech sales, but my goal is to help raise enough awareness and funding to see a cure in my lifetime. And so I've been doing that through Babson College and their basketball team, and do a fundraiser every year with them. So this upcoming year would be the 5th year. And then also just recently biked across the US to help raise awareness and funding. And through all my fundraising efforts, I've almost raised a total of $100,000. So it's been quite the journey.
Hello, my name is Camille Dunn. My connection to FTD was my father. He was diagnosed in early 2017 when I was in 6th grade, and he passed away about 2 years ago at 64 years old. He had the behavioral variant. Currently, I am a student at the University of Texas at Austin, where my father went. I went for him. I'm a pre-law student. I became involved with AFTD about 2 years ago, starting the first semester of my freshman year of college. Since then, I have participated in the With Love campaign each February. I've raised, I believe, over just around $6,000, which is wonderful. My main hope through my advocacy is to inspire young caregivers that they do not have to experience this alone. Yeah.
Hi all, thank you so much for having me join today, and thank you to Sarah, Julia, and Liz for putting this together. My name is Tanisha Gupta. My mom was diagnosed with behavioral variant FTD in 2020, although we had been seeing symptoms since around 2016, perhaps even earlier. I am a volunteer with the AFTD, and I helped bring over a young adult support group for individuals from mid-20s to mid-40s who are the adult children of individuals with FTD. And so I have been involved with that group since early 2021 and have tried to get involved with AFTD in a few other ways, but I'm very happy to be here today, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
So our goal today is to share our experiences as young caregivers for a parent with FTD, but it's also to raise awareness and to improve the experiences of young people who are on this journey today. So we want to recognize that everybody's families have a different experience. Some people are in two-parent households, other people could live in cities or in rural areas, and some people have more than one income, and others have other major health concerns. Variables introduce different complications and barriers that are on this journey.
We also want to note that FTD is so different from any other disease. Other people understand when you say your parent has cancer, for example, but they have no idea what FTD is. And a lot of us have to keep it to ourselves so we don't shock our friends or feel judged. All of us have experienced isolation and loneliness on this journey, and we hope our stories will help foster connection and community for youth caring for a loved one with FTD.
Camille, could you start off by sharing your experiences when your sister and for you and your sister when your father was diagnosed?
Yeah, of course. So I have a younger sister named Molly Jane, and she is currently a sophomore in high school. We are 4 years apart. Molly Jane was extremely young when my father was first diagnosed. I still remember when my mom told me we had been experiencing behavioral changes in him for, I'm guessing, about a year prior to his diagnosis. I had just gotten my braces off. My mom came upstairs. She had told me that he was getting a brain scan or a checkup, and she just kind of said, Daddy has a terminal disease. There's no cure. She didn't even tell me that it was frontotemporal dementia. I found it out a little bit later. I was 12 years old. It was extremely isolating. I didn't feel that I could talk to my sister about it because she was so young, bless her heart. I had just transitioned to a new middle school. I was trying to make new friends. Thankfully, I had some girlfriends who also transitioned to that same middle school from my elementary school. So that truly helped with my journey, but it was extremely isolating. I also did not fully understand it myself. I did not even fully understand it until maybe about high school. I just thought that my dad was kind of a jerk and that he was going to pass away at some point. Very, very grim, but that was the reality for me. I was questioning my faith, and just everything in between while going through that weird middle school awkward phase where you hate your parents and everything just sucks. It was hard, but I will say what truly helped me through was my solid 10 girl friend group throughout middle school and high school. They were truly my family when I felt isolated from my sister and my mom. Since my father's death, my mom and I have strengthened our relationship. I think that we had a very different way of processing our griefs. It's very interesting, and I'm sure that everyone else has experienced this too. It's you're losing the same person, but you're experiencing that grief in different ways because they meant something different to you. And that was something that through maturing into the young woman I am today, I was able to recognize that my mom had a completely different process and that it was a completely different thing for her than myself. So yeah, I will say getting involved with AFTD and finally being able to meet people who were around my age and even just older people or individuals who were experiencing a spouse even. I mean, it was just so eye-opening to have a conversation with someone and not have to describe, yeah, it's frontotemporal dementia, kind of like Alzheimer's. It truly was eye-opening. Yeah.
Yeah, I think most of us can relate to FTD impacting our friendships, especially in like middle school, high school, college. I know for me, like I was also in middle school when this was all happening, and it's just so confusing. Like you're a kid and you're already just trying to make like this background of like coming home, and all of a sudden it's like, well, we have to go visit daddy. And yeah, I think a lot of us can really relate to that feeling. So I really appreciate you sharing.
Spencer, can you share your experience when your father was first diagnosed and what this might have been like for you and your siblings?
Yeah. So my life has always been entangled with FTD. With being 14 when my dad passed away, and looking back on my memories, I don't necessarily remember a time when my dad wasn't sick. So I don't remember the exact moment my dad was diagnosed with FTD. I remember sitting on the steps outside my room as a kid and hearing my parents argue in the kitchen. Some nights because my dad's behavior was not characteristic of him. And so I remember like the day of recognizing like my parents are getting divorced and dad's just sick. I don't think I fully comprehended what that meant at the time. It took 7 years for my dad to get an accurate FTD diagnosis. And I remember when my mom and dad came back from a study in San Francisco, and my mom's showing me an MRI of my dad's brain scan, and it's showing black where his brain was supposed to be. And so I'm one of five, and I think we all handled it pretty differently. I think I was more angry with the situation. As a kid, I wanted nothing to do with it. I didn't want my dad at school or sport events because I was afraid of, how he might act. Whereas my sister still wanted him to be involved. And I remember one time there was a school play. So I'm a triplet and I have two older brothers. And so me and my triplet siblings were in a school play, and I didn't want my dad to be there, and my sister did. So my mom had him there for a bit and then had someone take him home for the other part of it. And I remember like telling my friends who asked why my dad wasn't at my basketball games that my dad just worked a lot, even though I knew he hadn't worked in years, just to avoid talking about it. And so I put a lot of my energy into basketball. And so that was an escape for me where I could just play ball, be a normal kid, and not have to think about my dad or the disease that consumed him. And so it kept me out of the house, and I didn't have to be stuck at home with him, and where he lacked empathy. And like there's one time I got hurt and he would just laughed. So kind of use basketball as a shield almost. And so for me, it was hard to have him around because, to everyone else, he looks normal, but his characteristics and behavior was not normal. And for a while after my dad's passing, that was one of my biggest regrets, was not wanting him around or not wanting to go visit a nursing home for the last few years of his life. But, now I find a lot of passion in volunteering with AFTD and being an ambassador for the state of Georgia and sharing my story and giving presentations. And I feel like now I experience delayed grief, but find a lot of beauty in my delayed grief, and keeps me tied to my dad and some of the good memories, and being able to share my story and help to find a cure.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree with you. I think it's a different experience. My siblings are significantly older. So I think I totally relate when you said that you didn't really want your dad around, events or sporting events at school. That's something completely relatable. And I think it is very distinct to being younger and fearing judgment from others in that critical state of development.
Tanisha, can you share your experiences when your mother was diagnosed?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of similarities in the stories that have been shared. I was a little bit older when my mom was diagnosed. So she was diagnosed when I was a junior in high school, or junior in college, but we've been seeing symptoms since I was around a junior in high school, if not a little bit earlier. And like Spencer said, it was a long journey. So she was first misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder, and it took a bit of time for us to get the behavioral variant diagnosis. But her diagnosis actually happened in the early days of COVID, so in mid 2020, which I think in some ways was a little bit lucky. We had some time to decide how to tell people. We were not seeing people all the time. And so it gave my immediate family some time to kind of figure the situation out. But in a lot of ways, personally, that timing was very difficult because everyone was having issues. All of my friends from childhood, all of my friends from, middle school, high school had all moved back home in with their parents. And while a lot of relationships were better than they were in, let's say, middle school, high school, like the mother-daughter dynamics had gotten better, they still weren't great. And so I was hearing about all these small quibbles here and there, and I just did not feel like I really had the space to share about something so drastic that was happening in my life. Um, looking back, I think it's very important to talk to people to share your experiences, but I really had a lot of difficulty in that time sharing. And so it took me almost half a year to be able to share. I went back to college in the fall of 2020, and that's when I told my friends from home who I'd been seeing relatively frequently when I was at home. That's when I told them about my mom's diagnosis. And my friends from college, I didn't really tell them until the spring of 2021. So again, like a semester later, about her diagnosis. I think it just took me a lot of time to come to terms with it. And one of the trickiest things for me that I think, everyone has kind of touched on is that I used to have a lot of fights with my mom. And at the time, I was like, okay, middle school, high school, mother-daughter relationship. But when I moved to college and a lot of my friends were kind of rebuilding their relationships with their parents and getting much stronger relationships, I found that my relationship with my mom was either staying the same or, deteriorating. And I didn't understand why that was the case. And I think I felt very, very upset about it. And it wasn't until we got this diagnosis that a lot of it started to make sense. But I carried a lot of guilt surrounding that I, wasn't the kindest in those years when objectively we didn't have a diagnosis, but, maybe I could have been a bit more mature and could have handled that situation better. And so I think for that reason, it took me a little bit of time to share with other people what was going on in my life. But, I think we've given three very similar, but also very different, ways that we approached the situation. And I'm glad I finally started talking to people. I think it was very helpful.
Thank you for sharing that, Tanisha. That was really powerful to hear. I think, yeah, like it's so hard to talk about this stuff with other people, especially like other people our age who don't understand FTD. I know like for a lot of us, a common experience is you'll tell somebody like, oh, my dad has dementia, and everybody's just like, oh, so he forgets things, and it's like, no, like not exactly. My dad actually like he gets in trouble with the police. We had to get restraining orders, like it's so much harder than that. And I think you really touched on that, Tanisha, and how like your relationship with your parent will change so much in a way that other people's relationships with their healthy parents just won't necessarily be like that. So I really appreciate you sharing that. I think that we all have that like that feeling that nobody else can relate to this. So I was wondering for you guys if any of you have somebody in your life who's actually like helped you through that to feel less alone and to feel seen. And if you didn't, what do you think would have been helpful for you?
I touched on this a little bit when I gave my first introduction, but I was so privileged to have just such an amazing group of girls that really helped me through. I never really talked about specifics, but a lot of them, when my father was still living with us, they witnessed it in middle school. He would say mean things to my friends, and I would have to say, I'm sorry, it's not him. So a lot of them had firsthand experience with his behavioral changes, and a lot of them saw it firsthand. Um, and even though, like I said, I wouldn't really share the logistics, especially when we sent him to a nursing home after he just got his decline started to increase, and my mom just could not take care of him by herself. I also was helping her, and it was traumatic. And the caregivers weren't, um, they were wonderful, but it's still, we needed 24-hour care. So after that, kind of like Spencer, I did not want to go. I do not like nursing homes. My grandfather, my dad's father, was in a nursing home around the time that my dad was first showing symptoms, and it was just always a very awkward encounter. I don't like the way they smell. I don't like the rooms. They just seem so bleak. And I would go for holidays, but truly it was such a um unique experience, and it was just so grim. And I like still remember the silent car drives home with my sister and my mother, because there were just no words to to describe the experience. There really weren't. So even though I wouldn't talk about it then, having quality time with my girlfriends in high school really helped, truly really helped. But yeah.
Yeah, Camille, I feel like I could still like remember the smell of the nursing home my dad was in. But I'm not sure if I had like someone specific that made me feel less alone or seen. Um, I think for me, that was more basketball. Just being a place where I can escape and not have to think about anything and compete with my teammates. Where no one knew what was going on at home and no one knew my dad was sick. And so I think I internalized a lot of what was going on. And I think that's why, I feel a lot of my grief now because I, put my focus into basketball. Um, but yeah, I think having that escape was almost having someone that made me feel less alone.
For me, I realized once I started sharing my experience that I actually had one friend from college and then one family friend who had been through very similar experiences. And I guess I'm a bit more closed off, like as a person, and so I wasn't very open, as maybe my last answer showed. I wasn't very open in sharing these experiences, and so I didn't really talk much about the day-to-day, um, you know, like the small fights we were having or my mom's paranoia. Like I didn't really talk much about that. I actually was more focused on, the emotional aspect and the guilt aspect of it. And I found that that is kind of more transferable between different diseases, unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it. So I had a friend from college whose dad was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. And she actually didn't share it with me until the spring when I shared my mom's diagnosis with her. But she had been, working through that for a few years, and she became a huge support system. We graduated college together, and then we went to the same law school, and so we were, each other's support systems throughout law school as well, and I found that to be really, really helpful. And then I also found that a family friend, who, my parents' age, so one of my parents' friends, her parent had behavioral variant FTD and passed away when she was, around my age. And so um, I think that once you start talking about these things, you find more people are in this position than you might have realized. And again, I think that was easier for me to do because I was a little bit older and people are a bit more mature and open about talking about these things. But I found it very helpful that once I started sharing, I was able to find these different resources. And I guess this is a great time to plug the support groups. I think that that's a great way to meet people who are in the same situation as you. I joined my support group again in the spring of 2021. And I found that to be really, really helpful way to, not only talk about emotions, but also just get really practical advice through the different stages of the disease. And so, yeah, I think that.
Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing your insights. We really want to make it a point that feeling less isolated has the power to help children and young adults cope with caring for a parent with FTD. So, what is one thing you would want to share with families as well as other people who could help a young person on this journey?
I think just, being there for your kid when they need you. Let them be involved if they want to, or let them never think about it if that's what they want. Now I'm very involved with volunteering for AFTD and doing fundraisers, whereas, my siblings aren't as involved. There's a time and place for everyone, and if it's not something for them, it's not something for them, and there's nothing against that. And um, I think it's important to still do activities you enjoy and have that escape. My mom made our lives as normal as possible for our situation, and I still had a good group of friends and was involved in sports extracurriculars. So having something where you can still just be a kid, I think is, and I also think it's important to just, give yourself grace. And even though your loved one is sick, still try to cherish the small moments. Like one of the moments I cherish is my dad took me to Cincinnati Bengals game and um, let me get as much food and whatever I wanted, probably because he had FTD, and let me get. So I ate a bunch of food and got sick that night, and my mom had lay on the bathroom floor with me all night to take care of me. And that's, a memory I cherish with them. So just enjoying the small moments still.
I think for such a long time, I thought that what happened to my father just defined who I was as an individual. I know that it sounds crazy, but that's what I thought. And I thought that I would never grow from it. I just thought that was who I was. For a while, I thought that when my father was still alive and sick, that I was just the girl in my middle school and high school who had that sick dad that no one really knows what disease he has. And then after that, when I went to college, I was now the girl whose father had passed away. And really this is why I said yes to joining this panel, because I want to tell everyone, even if it's just parents watching this breakout session currently, or if my hope is that there are some young caregivers too, like, you will be okay. I promise you, because that grief does not define you. It's what you make of that grief. And everyone here on this panel is so accomplished, and you will be okay. And you will be okay. Take it from us. Take it from us. Even if you are in middle school and your father or mother was just freshly diagnosed, even if you are in college, or if you are a parent, be patient with your children. Your griefs are, your grief processings are so much different than you think that they are. My mom and I used to get into fights about how she lost the love of her life and her best friend, and I lost my father, and the chance of ever having someone to walk me down the aisle. And it takes maturity from both ends through the process of losing someone to understand both of those sides. And it takes patience, and it takes a lot of growth, and it takes a lot of dedication. But I promise you, it will be okay.
I think both answers were very beautifully put, and I fear that nothing I can say will top those. But I want to reiterate that I think everyone incorporates this FTD journey in some aspect of their life. And like both Spencer and Camille said, like everyone on this panel is involved with the AFTD in some capacity because of these experiences that we've had, but we also have very fulfilling lives outside of this. The other sort of, key piece of advice that I think I would give is to really just talk about who that parent was before their diagnosis, whether it's like going through old photos, just talking about old memories. It can be, especially when you're in the moment and the parent is still alive and you're still going through, the living grief, it can be very easy to get bogged down in the day-to-day issues that arise and just sort of feel like you're constantly complaining about what's happening. And it's really important, I think, to take a step back and to talk about, who your parent was and what they, all that they did accomplish in their life, all that they wanted their child to accomplish, and just talk about all the positive, because if you don't talk about it, you're going to, somewhere down the line, you're going to lose it. And so I think it's really, really important to just, emphasize these stories, talk about these stories, and make sure, especially for younger children who maybe didn't get to know their parent for as long of a period of time, introduce them to what their parent would have been like if they were an adult and they were just friends rather than, parent-child relationship.
Wow, you guys, you have such amazing responses. I feel so honored to know all of you. I really think like you guys all touched on this a little bit, but I think the big theme here with people of our age group is resilience. Because like, yes, this is such a horrible thing. And like I know you were saying, Camille, like it feels like that's who you are for a while. I know I also struggled with feeling like, especially when I was in middle school, like I didn't want to tell anyone about it at school because I was so afraid that my whole reputation would just become like the girl whose dad died instead of like somebody who was funny or interesting or like something else I was passionate about. But now that I'm older, I definitely feel like I have a much better perspective on things, and I'm really proud to share this story. But I also understand that this story is not everything that I am, that there's so many other things I'm interested in and other things that I'm going to be able to do with my life. So just to touch on that theme a bit more, just to point out that we're not only involved with the AFTD, but we have so much other things going on in our lives outside of this work. I'd like to ask you guys how you're all doing now and what you would like to say about how you cope and move forward from this.
Yeah, I'm doing really well. I have a really supportive girlfriend and family and friends, and currently living in Atlanta. And I have a good career. I'm working in tech sales with a company called iTential and learning a lot doing that. Um, and I think I grieve more now, but I find a lot of beauty in my grief and keeps me, close with my dad and inspires me. And I'm very passionate about raising awareness and funding. And so I think, being able to share my story aloud and, seeing the support of others and even my colleagues at work and the company I work for is very supportive in everything I do, and they want to get involved too, which is really powerful.
Go ahead, Tanisha.
Sorry, I just assumed. I'm so sorry. I'm doing well. I don't know if I mentioned this at the start. My mom did pass away this past October, so October of 2024. I think, this disease is particularly difficult because you have two phases of grief. You're grieving, the person while they're alive, you're grieving the situation as it's occurring, and then once they pass away, you kind of go through grief all over again. And so it's been a few months, so I think I'm kind of getting out of that second phase, to the extent that you can. Broadly, there's no right way to cope with the situation. I think everyone handles it differently. I was in college. I lived away from home, worked for a year, and then came to law school. So I was not living at home during, the stages of my mom's diagnosis, but I would call every single day, talk to her. I would go home once a month. And I'm now about to graduate law school in a few weeks. So looking forward to that and sort of, moving and starting a new job. So yeah, I think everyone gets through it, I have found, and I think everyone on this panel has found that, keeping your parents' memory alive is what's really important. And so I think we're all involved in AFTD for that reason. That's why I started volunteering in 2021. I just felt that, unfortunately, there were no tangible steps that I could really take to fix her disease in the moment, but I felt that there were a lot of steps that I could take to just help people going through the same process. And so that was kind of my primary way of coping.
So I mentioned this earlier, but I am currently going into my junior year of college at the University of Texas. My father graduated from UT in the 80s. He was an ophthalmologist. At first, when I was little, I loved going and watching to go watch his cataract surgeries, but I decided to go the opposite route and go pre-law. So I'm currently a pre-law student. My grandmother, his mother, was a lawyer and then a judge. So I'm hoping to go in that route, but obviously I'm still young and life happens, so we will see. But my father also loves photography dearly. I took AP photography in high school. I am still pursuing photography currently as a little side hustle using his camera, actually, which I found in his closet when I used to go through his things. But yeah, I'm doing well. All of my high school girlfriends went to different universities, which was very hard to cope with. It's hard going to a college, a large college without anyone that you know super well, but I have made wonderful friends at UT, and I also have kept in contact with my high school girlfriends. I cannot wait to go back and see them in Houston when I return from Austin. But no, I'm doing well. I'm also the president of my sorority, which has been a lot of work, but it's very rewarding. I am really grateful that I started to get involved with AFTD 2 semesters ago or 3 semesters ago. I'm not good at math, but the fall semester of my freshman year, I cannot wait to get more involved with AFTD. I have never taken advantage of a support group, but Julia and Liz, y'all are truly inspiring. So I will be contacting y'all about joining that because it's awesome. And I really do think that it is so rewarding to be able to talk to y'all about this and to have these similar stories where all of our parents had the behavioral variant and understanding that. It's truly eye-opening. I will say my father passed away my senior year of high school, in my last semester before I graduated, right after I'd gotten into UT, basically a couple months after. It was very difficult. It sort of feels like still I've never had time to just pause and reflect, but I take my time when I need to. I have all of the old photos, even though I don't remember those memories because I was pretty young. He lives through those videos and he lives through those old med school textbooks that are in his study still and his high school textbooks. And I think there's a college text, whatever, his diplomas, he lives through everything. And we've kept all of his stuff in his study at home. So I always like to go in there and just look, and truly what I would recommend too is just keep whatever belongings that your parent left behind and just hold them dear to your heart, whether those are like old film photos that they had taken of them when they were in high school or college or anything like that, because truly like they do still live through those, and they also still live through you. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for all your responses. And it looks like we do have time for a quick Q&A. So I'll read off the first question and you can all respond. So someone asked, did you experience any lack of insight, and by that meaning lack of understanding from your parent that they had the disease or that it's impacting others, and how did you approach that?
I think I understood my dad was sick. Like as I mentioned before, like before getting the FTD diagnosis and like knowing my dad's behavior wasn't characteristic of him, and hearing my parents argue and thinking they're gonna get a divorce. And then understanding, no, my dad's just sick. I don't think I comprehended what that meant, um, but yeah, really just like understand he was sick and would do things uncharacteristically and weird things. So I didn't want, my friends around or to have them sleep over. Because my dad, there's one time he yelled at us and my friends went home because, they were scared and there's a lack of understanding from my peers. So I just kind of hid that from them as a kid. And then as a kid, I didn't know what FTD was. I just knew my dad was sick and his behaviors weren't him.
I can move on to the. Oh, did you have something to say, Tanisha?
Move on, sorry.
You sure? Okay. Yeah, if anybody else wants to add in, just interrupt me. Okay, so our second question. Okay, have any of you found that a professional therapist or counselor has been helpful? My dad was diagnosed when I was 18, and despite the stigma in my family against therapy, I was lucky to find an amazing therapist when I was 22. It might not be for everyone, but I do encourage mentioning that it's an option to try if you're struggling.
Yes, I did find a therapist right after my mom's diagnosis. I think similar situation where, typically my family did not necessarily, use therapy, but I felt pretty strongly that I wanted to speak to a therapist, and I found it to be incredibly, incredibly helpful. I found that in conjunction with the support group should be especially helpful because, I could use what I learned from one to the other and vice versa. And I was only in therapy for around a year, and then I ended up ending it just because it was through my university and I graduated, and so I didn't have access anymore. But I would highly recommend for people who are comfortable with, their kids going to therapy. I think that's a great resource.
Yeah, my mom put me in therapy when I was young, and like being a little kid, I didn't want to share anything. So my therapist would like have me play games, and then if I like made a move, I had to share a feeling. And yeah, so sometimes we just sat on the couch for an hour and I refused to say anything. And now I'm, still right now I'm between therapists. It's important to try to find a therapist that works for you. And if it doesn't work, try to find a new therapist. So right now I'm trying to find a therapist that best fits me. I recently tried two others and they weren't a good match. So I think it's important to recognizing you're not stuck if your therapist doesn't necessarily gel with you.
Awesome. And we have time for one more question. So The question states, while writing content for the AFTD, I've heard different perspectives about whether it's good to tell kids about the reality of an FTD diagnosis, though more recently people lean towards being honest because it helps kids and teens cope. Based on your experiences, do you think that learning about FTD helped you handle this journey?
So when my mom first told me about my father's diagnosis, she did not say the disease specifically, and she was also distraught, validly so. And she was for about a year after I was kind of taking care of my sister while I was trying to learn about the disease. I kind of asked her some questions, but it was really just about me doing my own research at first, which I think created a disconnect between my mom and I and created some resentment because I did not understand why she couldn't just be a good mother, because she was also dealing with an immense amount of grief for different reasons for the same person, like I've mentioned so many times before, but it's so relevant to that point. So looking back on my experience, even though, yes, I would say having that difficult conversation is, like I said, difficult and it's gonna hurt. And I know, I mean, obviously I'm not a parent, but I know that it hurts a parent to see your child suffering. And I can also say from being a child, it really hurts to see your parents suffering too, especially when they're trying to tell you about their spouse and what is happening to them. So, even though it's difficult, I would recommend having that conversation. Yeah, because I think that from my perspective, being as young as I was, and like I said, that middle school awkward phase, it was really easy to build up resentment towards my mom and all that anger from my dad's diagnosis towards her because I didn't know any better. So yeah.
I want to thank all of you for sharing so openly and honestly about your experiences caring for your parent with FTD. Your participation really increases understanding about what young people are going through. And while there are a lot of commonalities, everyone has their own journey, right? So a lot of you shared some kind of overlapping feelings, but we know that not everyone experiences it the same way. And knowing that there is a place for each person here is really powerful. We hope that it will improve the journey of young people in this role today, because we know there are so many of you here and so many families here. So I do want to share my screen quickly with some resources that I will also put in the chat. And yes, so I will put these in the chat, but I do want to share about Lorenzo's House is a great organization that has support for youth and young adults, so ages 4 through 35. And while AFTD does offer support groups for young adult care partners ages 17 to 26 and another group for 24 and up to 40, children who are younger do have access to support through Lorenzo's House. The American Association of Caregiving Youth is another opportunity. They have a lot of resources. AFTD support groups, I did mention them, and thankfully we have our wonderful facilitators on today. Our helpline is always available, and it's really important to note that information and awareness changes on the regular. So the helpline has the most current and up-to-date information that we have available. So if you find something that you have a question about, please reach out to the helpline. We have a booklet for families available on the AFTD website where you can request a hard copy through the helpline. And we also have a coloring book for children about FTD. And I'm going to continue sharing things in the chat, but and actually the resources might actually be on the Zoom webinar, but We are going to be closing and stopping for lunch in just a moment. And we do want to note that for those of you attending virtually, that there are informal lunch connections available. Please grab some nourishment and check out the open rooms through the Zoom event lobby. And thank you again for attending this breakout session.